Elena Vasquez never imagined her hands would touch the ivory keys of a grand piano again, not while wearing the gray uniform of the Grand Plaza Hotel, with its stiff collar and the name tag that made her both visible and invisible at the same time. For 7 years, she had moved like a shadow through the hotel's gleaming corridors. 7 years of polishing surfaces already shining, of straightening sheets with hospital corners, of nodding and smiling and stepping aside when guests approached. The job paid the bills barely, and that was enough. It had to be. That particular Thursday had started like any other. Elena arrived at 6 a.m., clocked in with a yawn, and collected her cleaning cart. The staff bulletin board announced the evening's big event, the annual Children's Hospital Charity Gala. For the housekeeping staff, that meant double-checking the grand ballroom, making sure every crystal on the chandelier sparkled, and that not a single speck of dust would offend the eyes of people who donated more money in one night than Elena earned in a year. Morning. Lena, called Thomas from maintenance as he fixed a wobbly table in the lobby. At 62, with salt and pepper hair and hands permanently stained with paint and varnish. He was one of the few people who made Elena feel seen. Morning, she replied, pushing her cart toward the service elevator. Getting ready for the big night? Thomas rolled his eyes. Rich people paying thousands for rubber chicken so they can feel good about themselves. Same as last year, Elena laughed, but without bitterness. She'd learned long ago that resentment was a luxury she couldn't afford. At least the money goes somewhere good. The elevator doors closed and Elena rode up to the 3rd floor to begin her morning rounds. As she cleaned, she hummed softly, an old habit she couldn't break. Today it was Chopin, the Nocturne in E-flat major. The notes flowed through her mind as clearly as if she were playing them, her fingers sometimes twitching unconsciously against the handle of the vacuum. By noon, Elena had finished the 3rd floor and moved to the mezzanine level. She was dusting the ornate frames of oil paintings when she noticed the commotion below. Mr. Phillips, the event coordinator, was pacing the lobby, his phone pressed to his ear, his free hand gesturing wildly in the air. Even from above, Elena could see his face had turned the color of overripe tomatoes. This is a disaster, his voice carried up to the mezzanine. The gala is in 6 hours. Elena continued dusting, trying not to eavesdrop but finding it impossible not to. Whatever had happened, it was clearly a crisis in Mr. Phillips's world. What do you mean he's not coming? He signed a contract. More pacing, more hand gestures, food poisoning. Convenient, very convenient, Mr. Ito. Elena paused. Hiroshi Ito was the famous pianist scheduled to perform at the gala. She had seen his name on the event program while cleaning the ballroom earlier. His performance was meant to be the centerpiece of the evening, meant to loosen the wallets of the wealthy patrons just before the donation pledges began. We need a replacement. Yes, I understand Boston is 3 hours away. No, we can't just play a recording. Elena felt a strange flutter in her chest. Before she quite knew what she was doing, she had abandoned her dust cloth and was heading downstairs. She stopped at the bottom of the grand staircase, suddenly aware of her gray uniform, her practical shoes, her hands rough from cleaning chemicals. Mr. Phillips had ended his call and was now surrounded by 3 other staff members, all looking equally panicked. The entire event is built around the performance, he was saying. Half these people are only coming because Ito was playing. Without him, Mr. Phillips? Elena's voice came out smaller than she'd intended. He didn't even look her way. Not now. We're dealing with a situation. I know, sir, I heard about Mr. Ito. This time he glanced at her, annoyed. Unless you know a concert pianist who can be here in 5 hours, I really don't have time. I play piano. The silence that followed was so complete, Elena could hear the ticking of the antique clock in the lobby. 4 pairs of eyes stared at her as if she'd suddenly started speaking in tongues. Mr. Phillips let out a short, stressed laugh. You play piano? Like at Chopsticks? Or Heart and Soul? Elena felt heat rising to her face. Classical. I studied at the conservatory. For a while, the conservatory? Mr. Phillips repeated as if she had said she'd studied on the moon. Yes, sir. For 3 years. Before I had to. She gestured vaguely at her uniform, not wanting to get into the story of her father's illness, the mounting medical bills, the hard choices. I can play anything Mr. Ito had planned. Probably. The event coordinator looked at her more carefully now, his desperation wrestling with disbelief. You're serious? Elena nodded, heart pounding. Why had she spoken up? This was madness. She hadn't played seriously in years, Just occasional sessions on the old upright at Thomas's apartment when he invited the staff over for dinner. The ballroom is empty now, Mr. Phillips said slowly. Show me. 15 minutes later, Elena sat at the gleaming black grand piano on the ballroom stage. Her uniform felt suddenly constricting, her hands trembling slightly as she placed them on the keys. The room was empty except for Mr. Phillips and Ms. Rivera, the hotel manager, who had been summoned from her office. Elena took a deep breath and began to play. She chose Debussy's Clair de Lune, a piece that had always calmed her. At first her fingers felt stiff, uncooperative. But as the familiar notes filled the space, something inside her unlocked. The music flowed from her hands as if no time had passed at all, as if she were still the bright-eyed student with dreams of concert halls instead of cleaning them. When the last note faded, Helena looked up to see both Mr. Phillips and Ms. Rivera staring at her with identical expressions of shock. My God, Ms. Rivera whispered. Mr. Phillips' phone rang, breaking the spell. He answered it, still looking at Elena with new eyes. Yes? No, don't cancel anything. I think we found a solution. What followed was a whirlwind. Suddenly, Elena was no longer invisible. She was whisked to Ms. Rivera's office where they discussed the evening's program. Could she play Bach's Goldberg variations? Yes, Chopin's Ballad No. 1, of course. Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor. She would need to brush up, but yes. We'll pay you, of course, Ms. Rivera said, looking both relieved and slightly dazed. The same fee we were going to pay Mr. Ido. Elena nearly fell out of her chair. That amount was more than she earned in 2 months. And you'll need something to wear, Mr. Phillips added, eyeing her uniform with newfound distaste. Something appropriate. By 4 p.m., Elena found herself in a small room behind the ballroom that served as a preparation area for performers. A black dress borrowed from Ms. Rivera's own closet and hastily altered by Daisy from the uniform department hung on a hanger. A staff member had been dispatched to Elena's tiny apartment to retrieve her music books, untouched for years. As the afternoon rushed by, news of the change spread through the hotel staff like wildfire. Thomas stopped by, his weathered face split by an enormous grin. Always knew you were better than this place, he said, gesturing at the hotel around them. Tonight, everyone else will know it too. But as 6 p.m. approached and the first guests began to arrive, Elena's confidence began to crumble. What had she been thinking? She hadn't performed in public for nearly a decade. These people were expecting a world-renowned pianist, not a maid who practiced on a battered upright on her days off. She peeked through the curtains and saw the ballroom filling with men in tuxedos and women dripping with jewelry. The tables were set with fine china and crystal, centerpieces of orchids and roses catching the light from the chandeliers. This was their world, not hers. They would see through her in an instant. At 7:30, Mr. Phillips knocked on her door. 10 minutes, he said, his earlier excitement now tempered with nervousness. The chairman is about to make the announcement about Mr. Ito's unfortunate situation. Elena nodded, unable to speak. Her hands were cold, her mouth dry. Are you all right? Mr. Phillips asked, suddenly concerned. You look a bit pale. I'm fine, she managed. It's been a long time. He hesitated, then stepped into the room and closed the door. Listen, Elena, if this doesn't work out, well, we'll all survive. The charity will still get donations. The world will keep turning. It was the kindest thing he'd ever said to her. Elena took a deep breath. I won't let you down, she said, and was surprised to find she meant it. When Mr. Phillips left, Elena sat alone in the small room, staring at her reflection in a dusty mirror. The woman who looked back at her was both familiar and strange. Elena Vasquez in Ms. Rivera's altered black dress, her dark hair pulled back from her face, her eyes wide with a mix of terror and determination. Outside, she could hear the chairman speaking to the crowd, his voice muffled through the door. Any moment now he would call her name, a name none of these people had ever bothered to learn before today. And she would walk out onto that stage, sit at that magnificent piano, and either resurrect her long-buried dreams or confirm that they should have stayed buried. Either way, after tonight things would never be the same again. Elena stood behind the heavy velvet curtain, her heart hammering against her ribs. The chairman's voice boomed through the speakers, addressing the crowd of wealthy donors who had paid thousands of dollars for their seats. Ladies and gentlemen, I regret to inform you that Hiroshi Ito will not be performing tonight due to a sudden illness. A collective groan of disappointment swept through the ballroom. Elena peered through a small gap in the curtains. The crowd looked exactly as she'd imagined. Men in crisp tuxedos, women in glittering gowns, faces carefully arranged to hide their annoyance at this unexpected change. However, the chairman continued, his voice brightening with forced enthusiasm, we are incredibly fortunate to have found a replacement performer who has graciously agreed to step in at the last minute. In the front row, Elena spotted Victoria Harrington, the wife of real estate mogul Richard Harrington. Mrs. Harrington was notorious among the hotel staff for her demanding nature and the cutting remarks she made as if the workers couldn't hear her. Tonight she wore a midnight blue gown and a necklace that could probably pay off Elena's student loans. A replacement? From where? Boston? Someone called out. The chairman cleared his throat. Actually, the performer is already here. She's a member of our hotel staff. A beat of silence, then a ripple of murmurs spread through the audience. Elena's mouth went dry. A staff member? Mrs. Harrington's voice carried clearly, dripping with disbelief. You mean like a music director or something? No, Mrs. Harrington, she works in our housekeeping department. The murmurs grew louder. Elena saw Mrs. Harrington lean over to whisper something to the woman beside her, both of them smirking behind jeweled hands. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Elena Vasquez. The spotlight swung toward the curtain. Elena took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and walked onto the stage. The borrowed black dress felt strange against her skin after years of stiff uniforms. Her hands were shaking slightly, but she kept her chin up as she crossed to the grand piano. As she moved into the full light, recognition dawned on several faces in the audience. She had cleaned their rooms, served them coffee, picked up their discarded towels. Now she was supposed to entertain them. Isn't that the maid who does the North Wing suites? A man stage whispered. I think she emptied my trash yesterday, another replied with a chuckle. Mrs. Harrington didn't bother to lower her voice. They can't seriously expect the help to entertain us, she said, gesturing toward Elena with her champagne glass. What's next? Will the doorman perform a juggling act? Laughter rippled through the front tables. Elena felt heat rise to her face as she took her seat at the piano bench. She adjusted it slightly, trying to ignore the skeptical stares and barely concealed smirks. Someone in the back coughed loudly. Another person checked their watch with exaggerated movement. For a moment, Elena's courage wavered. She could stand up right now, walk off the stage, and go back to being invisible. Back to safety. Back to a life small enough to manage. Then she caught sight of Thomas standing by the service entrance. He gave her a subtle thumbs up. Next to him was Daisy from uniforms and Luis from the kitchen. Several other staff members had gathered at the edges of the room, watching her with hopeful eyes. They had come to see her play, to see one of their own step into the light. Elena placed her fingers on the keys. The cool ivory grounded her. This at least was familiar territory. She had chosen to start with Bach, a prelude and fugue that was technically demanding but also centering. The kind of piece that required such focus that nerves would have to take a back seat. She began to play. The first notes rang out clear and confident, surprising even herself. Years of muscle memory took over as her fingers found the patterns they had practiced thousands of times before. Bach's mathematical precision had always calmed her, the interweaving voices of the fugue like a complex conversation between old friends. As she played, Elena kept her eyes on the keys, afraid to look up. But as the piece progressed, she sensed a shift in the room. The shuffling and whispering faded. The piece came to its conclusion, and Elena finally glanced up. The audience sat in stunned silence. She had expected polite applause at best, but instead found wide eyes and slightly parted lips. Even Mrs. Harrington looked taken aback, her champagne glass frozen halfway to her mouth. Emboldened, Elena moved directly into her second piece, Chopin's Ballad No. 1 in G minor. Where Bach had been precise and orderly, Chopin was emotion given form. The opening notes hung in the air like a question. As the piece built, Elena let herself be carried away by the music, her body swaying slightly with the crescendos and diminuendos. This was the piece she had played the day she'd learned her father's cancer had returned, the piece she'd practiced obsessively the week she'd decided to leave the conservatory to care for him. The last piece she'd performed before packing away her dreams along with her music books. Halfway through, Elena dared to look up again. The expressions had changed once more. Gone were the smirks and raised eyebrows, replaced by genuine engagement. In the third row, an older gentleman had closed his eyes, his head nodding almost imperceptibly with the rhythm. Near the back, a young woman was dabbing at her eyes with a napkin. As the final notes of the Chopin faded, there was a moment of held breath before applause broke out, hesitant at first, then growing stronger. Not the polite, obligatory kind she had feared, but something with real appreciation behind it. Elena nodded in acknowledgement, allowing herself a small smile before launching into Debussy's Clair de Lune. The Impressionist piece painted images of moonlight on water, its gentle rolling arpeggios washing over the ballroom. By now, the audience was fully under her spell. The same people who had laughed at her minutes ago now leaned forward in their chairs, cocktails and conversation forgotten. Even the waitstaff had paused in their duties, trays balanced carefully as they listened. When she finished the Debussy, the applause was immediate and enthusiastic. Elena's cheeks flushed with pleasure. She hadn't felt this alive in years, this connected to who she truly was beneath the uniform and the routine. For her final piece, she had chosen Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor, with its thundering bass notes and dramatic shifts. It was ambitious. She hadn't played it in years, but tonight she felt capable of anything. As the powerful chords reverberated through the ballroom, Elena caught sight of Mr. Phillips standing at the back, a look of utter disbelief on his face. Next to him, Ms. Rivera was smiling broadly, nodding as if to say, "I knew it." The Rachmaninoff built to its climax, Elena's fingers flying across the keys. She made a few small mistakes, a missed note here, a slightly fumbled transition there, but the emotion she poured into the piece carried it through. When the final chord rang out, Elena was breathing hard, a thin sheen of sweat on her forehead. This time the applause was thunderous. Several people rose to their feet, others quickly following. Within moments, the entire ballroom was giving her a standing ovation. Elena stood slightly wobbly on her feet and bowed deeply. As she straightened, she caught Mrs. Harrington's eye. The woman who had mocked her so openly was now on her feet with the others. Her face a complex mixture of emotions. Embarrassment, certainly, but also something that looked almost like respect. The chairman hurried back onto the stage, beaming as if he'd discovered Elena himself. "Ladies and gentlemen, Elena Vasquez. Who would have thought we had such extraordinary talent right under our noses all this time?" Elena flinched slightly at the backhanded compliment but maintained her smile. "And now," he continued, "I invite you all to enjoy your dinner while Miss Vasquez plays some lighter pieces for our listening pleasure." Elena hadn't been told about this part, but she nodded her agreement. As she returned to the piano, the waitstaff began serving the first course. The spotlight dimmed slightly, and Elena shifted to more atmospheric pieces that would complement the meal rather than demand attention. As she played, she watched the dynamic in the room change. People who had never looked directly at her before now pointed her out to their companions. Several guests nodded to her respectfully when their eyes met hers. Mrs. Harrington seemed to be avoiding looking in her direction altogether, suddenly very interested in her soup. During a brief pause between pieces, a waiter, Luis from the kitchen, approached the piano with a glass of water. "You showed them," he whispered as he set the glass down. "Every single one of us in the back is talking about it." Daisy said she almost cried. Elena smiled, genuinely touched. "I'm just glad I didn't make a fool of myself." Luis laughed softly. "Are you kidding? You made them look like fools. Big difference." He glanced over his shoulder to make sure no one was listening. The kitchen staff pooled their tips. "We want you to have them. For your dad's treatments." Elena's eyes widened. "Luis, no, I can't. You can and you will." He cut her off with a grin. "Consider it our investment in your future. Because after tonight, things are going to change for you, Elena. You mark my words." As Luis walked away, Elena turned back to the piano, blinking rapidly to clear the sudden moisture in her eyes. She began to play again, a gentle Schubert impromptu, her heart full. The same hands that had scrubbed toilets and changed sheets were now creating beauty that filled the entire room. The same people who had laughed at her were now entranced by her talent. And for the first time in 7 years, Elena allowed herself to wonder if perhaps her dreams hadn't been buried after all, just temporarily set aside, waiting for the right moment to bloom again. The dinner plates were being cleared when the chairman of the Children's Hospital Foundation took the stage again. Elena had been playing for nearly 2 hours, her fingers moving from one piece to another almost without conscious thought. Despite her initial nervousness, she now felt strangely at home on the stage, as if returning to a place she'd once lived but had nearly forgotten. "Ladies and gentlemen," the chairman announced, tapping his microphone, "before we move to our donation pledges for the evening, I believe we owe our remarkable pianist a proper round of applause." The audience responded enthusiastically, many rising to their feet once more. Elena stood from the piano bench and bowed, her cheeks flushed with a mixture of exhaustion and elation. "Miss Vasquez," the chairman continued, "you've certainly saved our event tonight. I think I speak for everyone when I say we're astounded by your talent. Would you mind telling us a bit about your background? I'm sure everyone is curious about where you studied." Elena hadn't expected to speak. Playing was one thing. The music could speak for her. But addressing this crowd directly was something else entirely. She glanced toward Mr. Phillips, who gave her an encouraging nod. The chairman handed her the microphone. Its weight felt strange in her hand. She took a deep breath. "Thank you for your kindness," she began, her voice smaller than she intended. She cleared her throat and tried again. "I studied at Westbrook Conservatory for 3 years." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Westbrook was prestigious. Many in the room would recognize the name. "Why only 3 years?" someone called out. "And how did you end up?" The question trailed off, but its implication was clear. How did someone with your talent end up cleaning rooms? Elena hesitated. She was not ashamed of her story, but she had never shared it with strangers, let alone a room full of people who, until tonight, had looked through her rather than at her. "My father became ill," she said simply. "Cancer, stage 4. My mother had passed away years before, and there was no one else to care for him. The medical bills, they added up quickly. The ballroom had gone completely quiet. Even the waitstaff had paused. I had a choice to make," Elena continued, finding her voice growing stronger. "And it wasn't really a choice at all. I left school, took the first job I could find that offered health insurance, and moved back home to take care of him." She didn't add that she had sold her piano to pay for a specialist, or that she had spent 2 years sleeping on a fold-out chair next to his hospital bed. Some details were still too personal, too raw. "My father passed away last year," she said, the words catching slightly in her throat. "But the medical debt remains. So I keep working." She handed the microphone back to the chairman, who seemed at a loss for words. The silence in the room was heavy, uncomfortable. Then from the front row, Victoria Harrington stood up. The woman who had laughed the loudest at the maid trying to play piano now looked directly at Elena, her expression unreadable. "Did you ever think about returning to music after your father passed?" she asked, her voice carrying clearly across the room. Elena shook her head. "Dreams cost money, Mrs. Harrington, and time. I work double shifts most days." "But you've kept practicing," Mrs. Harrington pressed. "You haven't played like that tonight without practice." A small smile crossed Elena's face. "The hotel has a piano in the Sterling room that's used for Sunday brunches." "It's nothing like this one." She gestured to the grand piano behind her. "But the night manager lets me play there sometimes, after my shift ends, when the guests are asleep." From the back of the ballroom, Elena spotted Thomas nodding. He was the one who had first caught her playing at 3 in the morning, who had encouraged her to keep her fingers limber, who had helped arrange those secret sessions with the night manager's blessing. "Well," the chairman said, finally finding his voice again, "I think I speak for everyone when I say we are deeply moved by both your story and your extraordinary talent. Miss Vasquez," he turned to address the crowd, "ladies and gentlemen, we gather each year to support the Children's Hospital, to ensure that no family has to choose between medical care and, well, anything else. Tonight we've seen firsthand how these impossible choices affect real lives. Miss Vasquez's story is not unique. Many families face similar decisions every day." Elena started to move back toward the piano, assuming he wanted her to continue playing, but the chairman gently touched her arm. "Please, stay for a moment," he said quietly before turning back to the microphone. "Now, we had planned to begin our donation pledges. But before we do, I'd like to introduce someone else. Dr. Rosalind Chen, please join us." A middle-aged woman in a simple but elegant black dress made her way to the stage. She had a kind face and moved with quiet confidence. For those who don't know her, Dr. Chen is the newly appointed director of the New England Philharmonic, the chairman explained. She's here tonight because the Philharmonic is one of our most generous supporters, but I believe she might have something else to say now. Dr. Chen took the microphone with a warm smile. I came here expecting to enjoy Hiroshi Ito, whom I've heard many times before. Instead, I've had the privilege of discovering a remarkable new talent. She turned to Elena. Miss Vasquez, your Bach was technically flawless, but it was your Chopin that truly moved me. You play with both precision and soul, a rare combination. Elena felt herself blushing again, unused to such direct praise. The Philharmonic has recently established a fellowship program for exceptional musicians who face financial barriers, Dr. Chen continued. It includes a stipend, mentorship, and performance opportunities. She paused, looking directly at Elena. I would like to offer you a place in this program. Elena stared at her, certain she had misheard. What? We would work around your schedule at first, of course, Dr. Chen added, as if this were a minor detail and not a complete reimagining of everything Elena had accepted as her reality. But eventually we hope fellows will transition to music full-time. The room erupted in applause. Elena stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. This morning she had been changing sheets and scrubbing bathrooms. Now the director of the Philharmonic was offering her a fellowship? I don't know what to say, Elena managed finally. Say yes, called a voice from the back, Daisy from the uniform department, who immediately covered her mouth in embarrassment at her outburst. Laughter rippled through the crowd. But it was different now, warm, inclusive. Nothing like the mocking tones from earlier. Elena looked out at the sea of faces. The same people who had dismissed her hours ago were now smiling encouragingly, waiting for her answer. In the front row, Mrs. Harrington was watching her intently, her earlier disdain replaced by something that looked almost like respect. Yes, Elena said, the word barely audible. She cleared her throat and tried again. Yes, thank you. I would be honored. More applause, more smiles. Dr. Chen squeezed her hand. We'll talk details later. For now, perhaps you could play us one more piece. Your choice. Elena nodded, returning to the piano on legs that felt suddenly unsteady. Her mind raced, trying to choose a piece that could possibly express what she was feeling. In the end, she settled on Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. Specifically, the third movement, with its rushing notes and fierce energy that felt like hope and possibility breaking free after years of constraint. As she played, Elena let the music carry her. The notes tumbled over each other, urgent and alive, like all the dreams she'd packed away now spilling out at once. Her fingers flew across the keys with newfound confidence. No longer the maid playing piano, she was simply a musician, seen, heard, valued. When the final chord rang out, the standing ovation was immediate and unanimous. Elena rose from the bench, tears streaming down her face. She no longer tried to hide them. These were not tears of shame or frustration, but of release, of recognition. The chairman returned to the stage, his own eyes suspiciously bright. I think we can all agree that this evening has turned out to be something truly special, he said. Now let us channel this inspiration into action. He launched into the donation portion of the evening, but with a new energy in his voice. Tonight we've witnessed how talent can bloom in unexpected places and how circumstance, not ability, often determines opportunity. Let's remember that as we consider our donations. Every child at our hospital has potential just waiting to be realized, if only they can get the care they need. As the pledges began, the amounts called out seemed larger than usual, each donor trying to match the emotion in the room with their generosity. Helena stepped back, intending to quietly exit the stage, but Dr. Chen gently guided her to a seat nearby. Stay, she said simply. This is happening because of you. You should witness it. And so Elena sat, watching as donation after donation was announced, each one representing another child who might not have to choose between health and dreams, another family who might be spared the impossible decisions her own had faced. Across the room, Elena caught Thomas's eye. The old maintenance man gave her a thumbs up, his weathered face creased in a wide smile. Next to him, Luis and Daisy and the other staff members were watching with undisguised pride, as if her achievement somehow belonged to all of them. And perhaps it did, Elena thought. Without them, their small kindnesses, their belief in her when she had stopped, believing in herself, She might never have found her way back to this part of herself. The chairman announced that they had reached their goal for the evening and then surpassed it by nearly 50%. More applause, more congratulations. Elena found herself swept into conversations, handed business cards, invited to future events not as staff but as a guest. Through it all, one thought kept repeating in her mind. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow she would wake up not just as Elena the hotel maid, but as Elena the pianist, Elena the musician, Elena who had been seen finally for who she truly was. The morning after the gala, Elena woke to sunlight streaming through the thin curtains of her small apartment. For a moment she lay still, wondering if last night had been a dream, the piano, the applause, Dr. Chen's offer. It wouldn't be the first time she had dreamed of returning to music, only to wake to the harsh reality of another day of cleaning rooms. But there on her nightstand lay the business card Dr. Chen had pressed into her hand, along with 3 others, one from the chairman of the Children's Hospital Foundation, one from a music professor at the local university, and one from a cultural reporter at the city newspaper. Next to them was a check for her performance fee, the amount making her dizzy when she looked at it. No, not a dream then. Elena's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Ms. Rivera, the hotel manager. Take the day off, paid. We need to talk about your schedule going forward. Proud of you. Elena read the message twice, still not quite believing it. A day off just like that? Usually she had to request time off weeks in advance, and it was rarely approved unless she was genuinely ill. She made herself a cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the city come alive below. The usual morning anxiety. Would today be the day Mr. Phillips found something wrong with her work? Would Mrs. Harrington in room 712 complain again about the towels was absent? Replaced by a strange bubbling hope she hardly dared acknowledge. By 10 o'clock, her phone was ringing constantly. Thomas called first, his voice gruff with emotion. Didn't get to say it properly last night, Lena, but I'm damn proud of you. Knew you had it in you all along. Then Daisy, talking so fast Elena could barely understand her. Everyone is talking about you. Mr. Phillips called an all-staff meeting this morning and he actually said your name right for once. And Mrs. Harrington checked out this morning and she asked who'd been playing piano. And then she left a $100 tip for you. After the 5th call, Elena silenced her phone. She needed to think, to process what had happened and what might happen next. The fellowship Dr. Chen had offered. What would it really mean? Could she actually consider changing course after 7 years? The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. Around noon, there was a knock at her door. Elena opened it to find Dr. Chen herself standing in the hallway, looking slightly out of place in the rundown apartment building. I hope you don't mind, Dr. Chen said, smiling apologetically. The hotel gave me your address. I thought we might talk in person. Elena ushered her in, acutely aware of the peeling paint, the second-hand furniture, the general shabbiness of the place. She hadn't had visitors in. Well, she couldn't remember the last time. I'd offer you tea, but I'm afraid I only have coffee and it's not very good, she said, embarrassed. Dr. Chen waved away her concern. I'm fine, thank you. I wanted to discuss the fellowship while the details are still fresh. And I thought you might have questions. They sat at Elena's small kitchen table, and Dr. Chen laid out the specifics of the offer. The fellowship would provide a modest stipend, less than Elena made at the hotel, but enough to live on if she budgeted carefully. More importantly, it would include lessons with top instructors, master classes, and eventually, performance opportunities with the Philharmonic. We typically require fellows to practice at least 20 hours a week, Dr. Chen explained. More as performances approach. I understand you're currently working full-time? Elena nodded. Sometimes more than full-time. I pick up extra shifts when I can. Dr. Chen frowned slightly. That would make this difficult. Is there any possibility you could reduce your hours? Perhaps work part-time? Elena thought about her bills, about the remaining medical debt from her father's treatment. The fellowship stipend would cover her rent and food, but not much else. I'm not sure, she said honestly. I have financial obligations. Dr. Chen's expression softened. Your father's medical bills? You mentioned them last night. Elena nodded again, not trusting herself to speak. Even a year after his death, discussing her father's illness and the financial burden it had created was difficult. I see, Dr. Chen said thoughtfully. Well, perhaps we could find a solution. The Philharmonic has donors who specifically support fellows with exceptional circumstances. She paused, studying Elena's face. But I sense there's something else holding you back. Something beyond the practical concerns. Elena looked down at her hands. Still a working woman's hands. The nails cut short, the skin roughened by cleaning chemicals despite the gloves she wore. Not a pianist's hands anymore. It's been 7 years since I played seriously, she said quietly. 7 years of cleaning rooms and scrubbing floors. I'm not the same person I was at the conservatory. What if last night was just luck? What if I can't really do this anymore? Dr. Chen leaned forward.
Elena, what I heard last night wasn't luck.
It was talent, yes, but also dedication. The kind that keeps someone practicing in empty rooms at 3 in the morning after exhausting shifts. The kind that doesn't die even when life gets in the way. She reached across the table and, to Elena's surprise, took her hand. Your circumstances have changed, but your gift hasn't. If anything, you play with more depth now, more understanding of life's complexities. That can't be taught in any conservatory. Elena felt tears threatening again. She seemed to cry more in the last 24 hours than in the previous 7 years combined. I'm scared, she admitted, the words barely a whisper. Good, Dr. Chen replied with a gentle smile. Fear means you care. It means this matters to you. Use it. By the time Dr. Chen left, they had worked out a tentative plan. Elena would begin the fellowship in 3 weeks, giving her time to arrange a reduced schedule at the hotel. She would start with just 10 hours of required practice, gradually increasing as she adjusted to her new life, and Dr. Chen would speak with certain donors about creating a special fund to help with the medical debt. As she closed the door behind Dr. Chen, Elena felt as if she were standing on the edge of a cliff, simultaneously terrified and eager to jump. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur. Ms. Rivera proved unexpectedly supportive, rearranging Elena's schedule to 3 days a week, with the promise of keeping her health insurance intact, at least until the fellowship provides its own coverage, she said with a wink. Word of Elena's performance spread through the hotel like wildfire. Guests who had attended the gala would point her out to others, sometimes asking for photos or autographs, which still felt bizarre to her. Several requested piano performances, offering tips that made her blush with their generosity. The most surprising development came from Victoria Harrington. The woman who had openly mocked Elena appeared in the hotel lobby one afternoon, asking to speak with her privately. Elena approached warily, still remembering the sting of her dismissive comments at the gala. Miss Vasquez, Mrs. Harrington began, her usual imperious tone softened somewhat. I owe you an apology, Elena tried to hide her shock. In 7 years of working at the hotel, she had never heard Mrs. Harrington apologize to anyone, least of all a staff member. My behavior at the beginning of the gala was inexcusable, Mrs. Harrington continued. I made assumptions based on your position, rather than your abilities. It was unkind. Thank you for saying so, Mrs. Harrington, Elena replied, not quite sure what else to add. I also wanted to tell you that my husband and I have made a donation to the Philharmonic, specifically for their fellowship program. Mrs. Harrington handed her an envelope. And this is for you personally. Not charity, she added quickly, seeing Elena's hesitation. Consider it an investment in your future. When Elena opened the envelope later, she found a check large enough to pay off the remaining medical bills, along with a note. Music should be heard. Talent should be nurtured. No one should have to choose. The morning Elena was to officially begin her fellowship, Tomas, Daisy, Luis, and several other hotel staff gathered in the employees' locker room to celebrate. They had pooled their money to buy her a leather music portfolio embossed with her initials. For all the new pieces you're going to learn, Daisy explained, beaming with pride. And for when you play at Carnegie Hall, Luis added, only half joking. Thomas didn't say much, but when he hugged her goodbye, he whispered, You deserve this, kid. Always have. Elena's first day at the Philharmonic was nothing like she had imagined during those late nights playing the hotel's piano. The building itself was intimidating, all soaring ceilings and polished wood, the air somehow thick with decades of musical history. The other musicians, most classically trained since childhood, watched her with curious eyes. The newcomer, the hotel maid turned pianist, Dr. Chen had arranged for her to use a practice room with a Steinway grand piano, similar to the one she had played at the gala. Alone with the instrument, Elena felt the old familiar panic rising. What was she doing here? Who was she to think she belonged in this world? She placed her hands on the keys but couldn't bring herself to play. 7 years of doubt and practicality whispered that this was a mistake, that the gala had been a fluke, that she should go back to the hotel where at least she knew what was expected of her. Then she thought of her father, who had saved for years to buy her first upright piano, who had worked double shifts himself to pay for her lessons, who had told her, even as the cancer was taking him, "My only regret is that you gave up your music for me." Elena took a deep breath and began to play, not Bach or Chopin or any of the classical pieces in her repertoire, but a simple folk melody her father had loved. Her fingers remembered it perfectly, muscle memory unaffected by years of disuse. As the sweet, uncomplicated notes filled the practice room, she felt something unlock inside her. This was why she played, not for applause or recognition, but for this feeling of connection. To her past, to her father, to something larger than herself. When she finished the folk song, Elena transitioned smoothly into Bach's French Suite No. 5. As her confidence grew, she moved to more challenging pieces, losing herself in the music. She didn't notice the practice room door opening slightly, didn't see Dr. Chen standing there with several other musicians, listening with approving smiles. Later that afternoon, as Elena was gathering her music to leave, an older pianist whose name she recognized from concert programs approached her. "You play from somewhere deep," he said simply. "Many of us have forgotten how to do that. Don't let us teach it out of you." Elena thought about his words on her bus ride home. The hotel uniform hung in her closet now, clean and pressed, ready for her reduced schedule. Her new music portfolio sat on her lap, already filled with scores Dr. Chen had recommended. She was straddling two worlds, not fully belonging to either just yet. Not quite a professional musician, no longer just a hotel maid. The transformation was incomplete, uncertain, but for the first time in 7 years she was moving forward rather than simply surviving. For the first time, the future felt not like a burden to be endured but like a gift waiting to be unwrapped. As the bus neared her stop, Elena allowed herself a small, private smile. Tomorrow she would clean rooms at the hotel. The day after, she would practice Liszt at the Philharmonic. Both were part of her now, the years of struggle and the promise of something new. Both had shaped her hands, her heart, her music, and somehow, that seemed exactly right. 6 months passed like pages turning in a book. Each day a new chapter in Elena's changing life. Spring had given way to summer, and summer to a crisp New England fall. The trees outside the Philharmonic's practice rooms blazed in reds and golds, visible through tall windows as Elena worked through a particularly challenging passage of Liszt. Her fingers moved more confidently now across the keys, muscle memory returning more fully with each passing week. She still worked at the Grand Plaza Hotel, though only 2 days a week. Ms. Rivera had arranged a special position for her, part housekeeping, part entertainment. On Saturday afternoons, Elena played piano in the hotel lobby, drawing crowds of guests who had heard rumors about the maid who played like a concert pianist. The hotel had begun advertising these performances in their brochures, and Ms. Rivera made sure Elena received proper compensation for them. "You're an attraction now," she had told Elena with a wink, "and attractions get paid." The remaining 5 days were devoted to her fellowship. 3 days of practice and lessons, 1 day of music theory and history classes, and 1 day of community outreach, teaching basic piano to children from low-income neighborhoods. This last part had been Elena's idea, suggested timidly during a meeting with Dr. Chen and enthusiastically approved. "Music saved me," Elena had explained. "Maybe it can save someone else too." Today was special, though. Today, Elena wasn't practicing or cleaning or teaching. Today, she was preparing for her first public performance with the Philharmonic, a special benefit concert for the Children's Hospital, bringing her journey full circle. Elena stood in front of her closet, staring at the garment bag that held her performance dress, not borrowed this time, but her own, a deep burgundy gown with a modest neckline and flowing skirt, purchased with part of Mrs. Harrington's investment. The older woman had insisted on accompanying Elena to select it, her keen eye for quality proving unexpectedly helpful. As Elena zipped the garment bag for transport to the concert hall, her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Thomas. "Knock 'em dead, kid. We're all going to be there." A lump formed in her throat. The hotel staff had pooled their resources to buy tickets for the concert, determined to witness this next step in her journey. Even Mr. Phillips had contributed, though he'd grumbled about the price. Elena took a deep breath and looked around her apartment. It was the same small place. She hadn't felt right about moving yet, not until the fellowship was complete and her future more certain. But it felt different now. Music scores were piled on every surface. A metronome ticked on the coffee table. A framed photo of her father now sat beside a news clipping about the upcoming concert, his smiling face seemingly approving of this new direction. The past 6 months hadn't been easy. There were days when Elena questioned everything, when the gap between her and her classically trained peers seemed impossibly wide. Days when she'd arrive home late from practice with hands cramping and back aching, only to set her alarm for 5 a.m. to start a hotel shift. Days when she wondered if she was trying to straddle two worlds that were never meant to coexist. But there were other days too. Days when a passage she'd struggled with suddenly unlocked beneath her fingers. Days when one of her young students played their first complete piece, face shining with pride. Days when hotel guests approached her after her lobby performances, sometimes with tears in their eyes to tell her how her music had moved them. On those days, the struggle seemed worth it. The concert hall was already buzzing with activity when Elena arrived 3 hours before the performance. Technicians adjusted lighting and sound equipment. Volunteers arranged programs and donation envelopes on tables in the lobby. Fellow musicians warmed up in practice rooms and hallways, the cacophony of different instruments creating a strange, disjointed symphony. Elena found her assigned dressing room, not the star's dressing room. Of course, but a small, clean space with her name on a paper sign taped to the door. Just seeing Elena Vasquez printed there made her heart skip. She carefully hung her dress and sat at the small vanity, staring at her reflection. The face looking back at her was both familiar and strange. Still Elena, but somehow more fully herself than she'd been in years. There were new lines around her eyes from long hours of practice, but also a light in them that had been missing for too long. A knock at the door broke her reverie. 10 minutes until group rehearsal, called the stage manager. The rehearsal passed in a blur of nervous energy and last-minute adjustments. Elena was not a soloist tonight, that would come later. Dr. Chen had promised, but she was part of the piano section for several pieces, including Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue, which would close the first half of the program. Dr. Chen moved among the musicians, offering encouragement and occasional corrections. When she reached Elena, she simply nodded and smiled. "You're ready," she said quietly. "Just remember to breathe." As the rehearsal ended and musicians dispersed to prepare for the evening, Elena returned to her dressing room to find a small package waiting. Inside was a delicate bracelet of musical notes and a card signed by Daisy, Luis, Thomas, and the rest of the hotel staff. "Play your heart out," it read. "We always knew you were meant for bigger things than changing sheets." Tears pricked at Elena's eyes as she fastened the bracelet around her wrist. These people who had seen her at her most ordinary, who had worked alongside her through endless shifts of thankless labor, had never doubted her, even when she doubted herself. The hours before the performance passed quickly. Elena changed into her gown, applied simple makeup, and twisted her hair into an elegant knot. As she made these preparations, a memory surfaced. Her father sitting in the audience at her conservatory recitals, always in the same worn but carefully pressed suit, always with the same proud smile. "You were born for this, mija," he would say afterward, no matter how she felt she had played. "I hope you can see me now, Papa," she whispered to the empty room. Another knock at the door. "Places in 5 minutes," the stage manager called. Elena took a deep breath and stepped into the hallway, joining the stream of musicians moving toward the stage. Through a crack in the curtain, she could see the hall filling with people in formal wear, donors, music lovers, hospital supporters, and there, in a block of seats near the middle, were familiar faces from the hotel. Thomas, Daisy, Luis, Ms. Rivera, even Mr. Phillips looking uncomfortable in a suit that seemed a size too small. They had come early to get good seats, Elena realized, touched by their support. In the front row sat Mrs. Harrington and her husband, the former looking far more approachable than she ever had at the hotel. Beside them was the chairman of the Children's Hospital Foundation, who had reached out personally to invite Elena to participate. 2 minutes, whispered the stage manager. Elena took her place with the other pianists, adjusting her seat at one of the 3 grand pianos positioned on stage. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure the musicians next to her could hear it. Then suddenly the curtain was rising. Warm light bathed the stage. The audience applauded as Dr. Chen walked out, bowed, and turned to the orchestra. She raised her baton, and just like that, they were playing. The first half of the concert moved seamlessly from piece to piece. Elena played her parts without major errors, though she knew she could have done better if her nerves hadn't been quite so raw. As Rhapsody in Blue began, she focused on the familiar notes, letting the music wash over and through her. By the final flourish, she felt centered again, present in a way she hadn't been at the start. During intermission, Elena remained backstage, sipping water and trying to stay calm. The second half would include a surprise not listed in the program, a short solo piece that Dr. Chen had asked her to prepare. A taste of what's to come, she had said, and a reminder of where this journey began. When the audience had returned to their seats and the second half was about to begin, Dr. Chen gathered the musicians for a final word of encouragement. Then unexpectedly she drew Elena aside. "I've made a small change to the program," she said. "After your solo, I'd like you to say a few words about your journey, from the hotel to here. Your story has power, Elena. Let them hear it from you." Before Elena could protest, they were being called back to stage. The second half began with Tchaikovsky, the familiar melodies helping to settle her renewed nerves. Then all too quickly, Dr. Chen was turning to the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, many of you attended the Children's Hospital Gala earlier this year, where a remarkable thing happened. When the scheduled pianist canceled, a member of the hotel's housekeeping staff stepped in and stunned everyone with her talent. Tonight, that same pianist is part of our orchestra as a Philharmonic Fellow. Please welcome, for a special solo performance, Elena Vasquez." The applause was warm and encouraging as Elena moved to the center piano. She sat, adjusted the bench, and placed her hands on the keys. She had chosen Chopin's Nocturne Opera 9, No. 2, not the most technically challenging piece, but one that allowed for emotional expression, one that her father had particularly loved. As she played, Elena felt a strange sense of time collapsing. She was simultaneously the nervous conservatory student, the grieving daughter playing in hospital waiting rooms, the hotel maid stealing moments at an unused piano, and this new person, a fellow of the Philharmonic, a musician reclaiming her identity. The piece ended too soon. As the final notes faded, there was a moment of hushed silence before the audience erupted in applause. Elena stood and bowed, then realized Dr. Chen was gesturing for her to speak. Heart hammering, she stepped toward the microphone. The faces looking back at her were expectant, encouraging. She spotted Thomas giving her a thumbs up from his seat. "6 months ago, I was changing sheets at the Grand Plaza Hotel," she began, her voice shaky at first but growing stronger. "I had put aside my dreams of music to take care of my father during his illness. After he passed away, I just kept going, kept cleaning rooms, kept surviving. Music became something I did in stolen moments. After everyone else had gone to bed," she paused, gathering her thoughts. "Then a famous pianist got food poisoning," she continued, drawing a gentle laugh from the audience. "And somehow I found myself on a stage again. What happened next still feels like a dream sometimes." Elena looked toward the hotel staff, then to Mrs. Harrington, then to Dr. Chen. "What I've learned is that dreams don't always die when we set them aside. Sometimes they're just waiting for the right moment to return. And sometimes, the very experiences we think are taking us away from our path are actually preparing us for it in ways we couldn't imagine." She touched the bracelet on her wrist. "I play differently now than I did at 20. There's more life in my music, more understanding of both joy and sorrow. Every room I cleaned, every early morning shift, every night spent beside my father's hospital bed. It's all there in how I approach the piano now." Elena smiled, feeling a sense of peace wash over her. "I'm not just a pianist who used to be a maid or a maid who happens to play piano. I'm both of those experiences and more, and I'm grateful for second chances, for people who saw something in me even when I couldn't see it myself, and for music, which always finds a way to bring us home." As she returned to her seat among the orchestra members, the applause felt different, deeper somehow, more personal. Elena caught Dr. Chen's approving nod as the conductor raised her baton for the next piece. The remainder of the concert passed in what felt like moments. When the final number concluded and the orchestra took their bows, Elena spotted the hotel staff on their feet. Thomas whistling through his fingers like a teenager at a rock concert. Mrs. Harrington was dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. The chairman of the hospital foundation was beaming and applauding enthusiastically. Later, at the reception, Elena moved between worlds, chatting with her fellow musicians one moment, hugging Daisy and Luis the next, accepting congratulations from hospital donors who remembered her from the gala. Dr. Chen found her as the evening was winding down. "The Philharmonic is planning its next season," she said casually but with a twinkle in her eye. "We're considering featuring some of our fellows in a special showcase. Solo performances." Elena's eyes widened. "Really? You think I'm ready?" "More than ready," Dr. Chen assured her. "And there's something else. The music director position for the Children's Hospital program is opening up. 3 days a week bringing music to the pediatric wards. If you're interested, I'd like to recommend you." Elena thought of her father's hospital room, how she'd played for him during those long, painful days. How the music had seemed to ease his suffering, if only for moments at a time. "I'd be honored," she said. As the reception ended and guests began to leave, Tomas approached her, looking slightly out of place in his seldom-worn suit but beaming with pride. "So," he said, nodding toward Dr. Chen and the other Philharmonic members, "this is your life now, huh? Pretty fancy." Elena smiled and impulsively hugged the old maintenance man who had been the first to encourage her to keep playing. "Not instead of the old life," she said. "In addition to it, I'm still playing at the hotel on Saturdays." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Because you need the money?" Elena shook her head. "Because I need the reminder of where I've been, of who helped me along the way." The old man nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Well, look at you now. Your dad would have burst his buttons with pride." "I know," Elena said softly. "I think maybe he had a hand in all this somehow." As they walked out of the concert hall together, the hotel maid and the maintenance man, stepping into the cool night air alongside tuxedoed patrons and evening-gowned donors, Elena felt a completeness she hadn't experienced in years. The path ahead was not certain. There would still be struggles, still be moments of doubt. But for the first time in a very long time, Elena Vasquez was moving forward with her whole self, not just surviving, but becoming.